Her tribe left her in the desert to die just because she couldn't get married. But 3 days later, a cowboy found her buried alive in the sand. The sun was just starting to rise when Nia opened her eyes. In the Apache village where she was born, it was her final dawn. She was aware of this since the Council of Elders had reached a final decision last night. She could leave at noon. In her tiny shelter, she slowly sat up and examined her few belongings. An old plant-cutting knife, an old blanket, and an animal skin water bag. All she had in the world was that. This was everything during my 21 years of life. She could hear children running between the tents, women lighting fires, and the village waking up outside, men preparing to hunt. Familiar sounds that would soon be only memories. Nia closed her eyes, remembering how she had arrived at this moment. Her parents had died when she was 12. A terrible illness took them within days, leaving her completely alone. No siblings, no uncles, no one to speak for her. For 9 years she had survived on the trib's charity. She worked harder than anyone, hunting, gathering, helping the elderly women. She did everything possible to earn her place, but it was never enough because in her tribe, a woman without family had no value. Marriages were arranged between families. Without parents to negotiate for her, no man could take her as a wife. It was impossible according to tradition, and a woman who could not marry was a burden and extra mouth to feed without purpose. The council had discussed it for weeks. Some elders wanted to give her more time. Others insisted she had already received enough charity. In the end, the decision was unanimous. She had to leave. "You have until noon," the chief had told her the night before. His voice was not cruel, only tired. "We have been generous to you for years, but we can no longer feed you. You cannot marry, you cannot have children who belong to our tribe. It is time for you to find your own path." Na had accepted in silence. What else could she do? Begging would be useless, crying would be shameful, so she simply nodded and returned to her shelter. Now, as she packed her few things, she felt a terrible emptiness in her chest. It wasn't exactly fear. It was something worse. It was the feeling of belonging nowhere in the world. She left her shelter when the sun was highest. Some women looked at her with pity, others simply looked away. The children stopped playing to watch her pass. No one said goodbye. Na walked to the edge of the village with her head high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. 2 warriors escorted her to the boundary of the tribal territory, making sure she truly left. When they reached the border marked by 3 large rocks, the warriors stopped. "This is the end of our territory," one of them said without meeting her eyes. "Do not return." And without another word, they turned and began walking back to the village. Nia stood watching as the only people she knew disappeared into the distance. The silence of the desert enveloped her like a heavy blanket. She took a deep breath and looked ahead. The desert stretched endlessly before her, sand, rocks, and cacti as far as the eye could see. "It's okay," she told herself. "I will survive. I will find another tribe. I will find a place to belong." She began to walk. The first day was tolerable. She still had water in her bag, and determination kept her moving. She searched for signs of life, other camps, anything, but found only more desert. The second day the water ran out. The sun was relentless, burning her without mercy. Each step became harder. Her lips began to crack. Her throat burned, but she kept walking because stopping meant giving up. The third day the world became a blurry nightmare. The heat was unbearable. She no longer sweated because her body had no fluids left to lose. She stumbled constantly, fell, got up, fell again. At sunset on the third day, her legs finally refused to go on. Nia fell to her knees on the burning sand, gasping with her vision clouded. She tried to stand, but her body did not respond. Tears wanted to come, but there was no moisture to form them. "Not like this," she whispered with a hoarse, broken voice. "Please, not like this." But the desert was indifferent to her pleas. She let herself fall to the side, her cheek touching the hot sand. The sky above her began to darken. She no longer felt the heat, no longer felt pain, only a deep fatigue that dragged her toward nothingness. She closed her eyes slowly, and everything disappeared. While Na lay unconscious in the desert several miles away, Blake was riding back to his ranch. He was a 30-year-old cowboy who had learned to live alone after losing his family young. That day he had gone to town for supplies and was now returning via a shortcut through the desert. His horse, Thunder, knew the path well. Suddenly, Thunder stopped abruptly, his ears alert and pointing forward. "What is it, boy?" Blake asked, following the animal's gaze. There was something in the sand, something that should not be there. Blake felt a chill run down his spine. He spurred Thunder gently, approaching cautiously. As he drew closer, the object took shape. It was a person, a woman. "No way!" he exclaimed, jumping off his horse and running toward her. The young woman lay motionless on the sand, dressed in Apache clothing. Her skin was sunburned, her lips white and cracked. Blake searched for her pulse with trembling hands. She was barely alive, but alive. Without wasting a second, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Dehydration had consumed her. He mounted Thunder, holding her against his chest as he rode desperately toward his ranch. "Hold on," he murmured, though he knew she could not hear him. "I will save you. I promise." Blake rode faster than he ever had before. The light weight of the unconscious woman against his chest constantly reminded him how close she was to being lost. Thunder, his faithful horse, seemed to understand the urgency and ran with all his strength. "Come on, Thunder, a little farther," Blake murmured, looking at the horizon where his ranch finally came into view. The wooden buildings looked like a refuge in the middle of the endless desert. The sun had almost completely set, leaving the sky painted purple and orange. The temperature was beginning to drop, but that did not ease the woman's critical condition. When they reached the ranch, Blake practically jumped off his horse without waiting for it to stop completely. He carried the woman with extreme care, as if she were made of glass, and ran toward his house. "Hold on, please hold on," he repeated as he opened the door with his shoulder. His home was simple but clean, one large room that served as both living area and kitchen, and a small bedroom at the back. Blake carried her directly to his bed and laid her gently on the clean blankets. The last light of day came through the window, illuminating the young woman's face. Even in that deplorable state, Blake could see she was beautiful. But there was no time for such thoughts. Every second counted. He ran to the kitchen and filled a container with fresh water from the barrel he kept. He grabbed clean cloths and returned to her side. He knelt beside the bed, wetting a cloth and pressing it gently against her cracked lips. "Come on, you need to drink," he whispered, letting a few drops fall into her mouth. The woman did not react. Her breathing was so weak that Blake had to put his ear close to her mouth to confirm she was still breathing. He continued moistening her lips drop by drop. Being patient, he knew giving her too much water at once could be dangerous in her state. Her body needed to recover slowly. After several minutes, the woman swallowed slightly. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but for Blake it was like witnessing a miracle. "That's it like that," he encouraged. "Come on, a little more." He continued giving her water little by little, also wetting fresh cloths to place on her burning forehead. Her skin was burned by the desert sun. She would need days, maybe weeks to fully recover. Blake worked for hours. When he finished hydrating her as best he could, he covered her sunburns with an herbal ointment he made for his animals. It was not ideal, but it was better than nothing. Finally exhausted, he sat in a chair beside the bed. Night had fallen completely. He lit an oil lamp that illuminated the room with a warm, soft glow. He watched the woman sleep. Her breathing was now a little stronger, more regular. Her cheeks, which had been sunken before, now showed a faint hint of color. She was responding to treatment. "Who are you?" Blake murmured quietly. "What happened to you?" The clothes she wore were definitely Apache. Blake had lived in these lands long enough to recognize the designs and patterns, but why was she alone in the desert? Why had she been abandoned? He rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the day's fatigue. He should sleep, but he did not want to leave her alone. What if she worsened during the night? What if she needed more water? He decided to stay awake, watching over her. He made strong coffee in the kitchen and returned to the chair beside the bed. The hours passed slowly. From time to time, he gave her more water, changed the cloths on her forehead, and made sure she was still breathing. It was around 3:00 in the morning when something changed. The woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Blake leaned forward immediately, alert. "Miss, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes opened slowly, confused and disoriented. She blinked several times, trying to focus. When she finally saw Blake leaning over her, her eyes opened wide with fear. "Easy, easy," Blake said softly, raising his hands to show he was not a threat. "You are safe. I'm not going to hurt you. Nia tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Only a hoarse, painful sound came out. "No, don't talk yet," Blake said, taking the cup of water. "You need to drink slowly." Slid his hand behind her head, helping her sit up slightly so she could drink. Nia drank desperately, but Blake controlled the flow so she did not take it too fast. "Slowly, slowly, you have to take it easy or you will get sick," he explained with a gentle voice. After several sips, Nia lay back down, closing her eyes. Tears began to run down her cheeks, tears her body had not been able to produce before. "It's okay," Blake murmured, not really knowing what to say. "It's over. You're safe now." Na opened her eyes again and looked at him intently. Blake could see so many emotions in those dark eyes: confusion, fear, relief, sadness, but above all he saw gratitude. "Where?" she managed to whisper with a raspy voice. "My ranch," Blake replied. "I found you in the desert a few hours ago. You were well. You were in very bad shape, but you are going to be okay. I promise." Nia looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, her eyes closed again and she fell back asleep. But this time, it was a more natural, more restful sleep. Blake sighed with relief, sinking into his chair. She was going to survive. He had done it. He sat there for the rest of the night, watching her sleep. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, Blake realized something. His life had just changed completely. He had saved this woman. But somehow he felt that maybe she would also save him from his loneliness. He did not know her name, did not know her story, but he knew something important had just begun. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, illuminating a new day full of unknown possibilities. Blake finally allowed himself to close his eyes, exhausted but satisfied. In the bed, Nia slept deeply, breathing steadily and strongly. Her body was beginning to heal. Her soul, too, would soon begin to find peace. Outside, thunder nickered softly as if greeting the morning. The ranch was waking to a day that would mark the beginning of an extraordinary story, a story of survival, hope, and eventually love. 3 days had passed since Blake rescued Nia from the desert. The young Apache woman was recovering slowly but surely. She could now sit up in bed, drink water without help, and eat small portions of soup that Blake prepared patiently. During those days, they had spoken little. Nia still did not fully trust this stranger who had saved her, and Blake respected her silence. He gave her space, but was always nearby in case she needed anything. That morning, Blake decided it was time to do the ranch chores he had neglected. The animals needed attention, the stable needed cleaning, and he had to check the fences. "I'm going to work outside," he told Nia, who was sitting by the window looking at the landscape. "If you need anything, shout. I will be close by." Nia nodded slightly without looking at him. Blake sighed and went outside. The sun shone intensely over the ranch. Blake headed to the stable first, where Thunder and 3 other horses waited to be fed. As he gave them hay and fresh water, he thought about Na. He knew she was Apache from her clothes and features, but he did not understand why she had been alone in the desert dying. Had she been abandoned? Had she gotten lost? He wanted to ask her, but did not want to pressure her. When she was ready, she would talk. He was finishing cleaning the stable when Thunder nickered nervously. Blake raised his head, alert. The horse was looking toward the main road leading to the ranch. A cloud of dust rose in the distance. Someone was coming. Blake stepped out of the stable, shielding his eyes from the sun with his hand. Soon, he could make out 3 riders approaching quickly. His instinct told him something was not right. The men arrived at the ranch and dismounted without asking permission. They were rough types with dirty clothes and dangerous looks. Blake recognized them immediately, the Carlson brothers, known throughout the region for causing trouble. "Good morning, Cowboy," said Jake Carlson, the oldest of the 3, with an unpleasant smile. "Nice ranch you have here. What do you want?" Blake asked directly, standing firm but not showing aggression. "We were passing by and thought it would be neighborly of you to share some food and water," Jake replied, looking toward the house. "We have ridden a long way." "You can take water from the well," Blake said, pointing to the side. "But I do not have food to spare." It was a lie. He had enough supplies, but he did not want these men entering his house. Not with Nia inside, vulnerable. "Come on, friend. Do not be like that," intervened Tom Carlson, the second brother. "We just want a little hospitality." The 3 men began walking toward the house, ignoring Blake. He moved quickly, blocking their path. "I said no," Blake repeated with a firmer voice. Jake Carlson stared at him, his smile fading. "We do not want trouble, Cowboy, but we do not like being told what to do either." The tension was palpable. Blake knew he was at a numerical disadvantage, but he could not allow them to enter his house. Inside, Nia had heard the voices. She got out of bed with difficulty and approached the window. She saw Blake facing three men who clearly wanted trouble. Her heart began to beat rapidly. This man had saved her, had cared for her without asking anything in return, and now he was in danger because of her, because he did not want those men to come in where she was. Nia looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the bow and Apache arrows that Blake had carefully stored with her belongings. He must have found them near where he rescued her. With trembling but determined hands, Nia took the bow. She was still weak, but she had been trained since childhood in the use of these weapons. It was part of her Apache upbringing. Outside, the situation worsened. "Last chance, Cowboy," Jake threatened. "Either you give us what we ask for or we take it." The three brothers began advancing toward Blake. He stepped back, calculating his options. He did not have his weapon with him. He had left it inside the house. Suddenly, a whistling sound cut through the air. An arrow embedded itself in the ground directly between Jake, Carlson, and Blake. Everyone froze, looking at the arrow vibrating in the earth. Slowly, they all turned toward the house. In the doorway stood Nia, weak but upright, with a bow in her hand and another arrow already nocked, pointing directly at Jake. "Leave," Nia said with a clear voice in Spanish, though her legs trembled from the effort. Now the Carlson brothers looked at each other, surprised. They had not expected to find an Apache woman at this ranch, much less one pointing a bow at them. "Easy, miss," Jake said, raising his hands. "We do not want trouble with the Apache." "Then leave," Nia repeated, her voice stronger now. The arrow did not tremble, her aim was perfect. Blake looked at Nia with a mixture of surprise and admiration. She was so weak she could barely stand, yet there she was defending him. Tom Carlson took a step toward his horse. "Come on, brothers, it is not worth it." Jake looked at Blake with hatred. "This is not over, Cowboy. I do not care," Blake replied calmly. "But if you return, you will not be welcome." The three brothers mounted their horses, throwing hostile glances at Nar and Blake. With a final grunt of frustration, they spurred their horses and rode off, leaving another cloud of dust. Blake waited until they had completely disappeared over the horizon before running to Nia. He arrived just in time. Her legs gave way and he caught her before she fell. "Are you crazy?" Blake said, but his voice was full of concern, not anger. "You can barely stand." "You saved me," Nia murmured weakly, leaning against him. "You saved me. It was the least I could do." Blake carried her back to the house and laid her carefully on the bed. Nia looked at him with tired but grateful eyes. "Thank you," Blake said softly. "You were incredibly brave and your aim was perfect." For the first time since she had woken up, Nia smiled slightly. "I'm Apache. They teach us from childhood." "What is your name?" Blake finally asked. "Nia," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Nah," Blake repeated, smiling. "I am Blake," she nodded, her eyes already closing from exhaustion. "Blake, thank you for everything." "Rest," he said, covering her with a blanket. "We will talk later." As Nia fell asleep, Blake left the room thoughtful. He knew the Carlson brothers might return. He would have to be prepared, but he also knew something else. Nia was not just a helpless victim. She was a warrior. Together, they could face whatever came. 2 weeks had passed since the incident with the Carlson brothers. Nia had recovered remarkably. She could now walk without difficulty, help with ranch chores, and gain more strength each day. The relationship between her and Blake had changed. There were no more awkward silences. They talked as they worked, shared meals, and little by little, Nia had told him her story. Blake listened attentively as she explained about her parents' death, how the tribe had expelled her for being unable to marry without a family to represent her. The sadness in Nia's eyes when she spoke of her past made Blake's heart clench. "What they did to you was not fair," Blake had told her that night. "You deserve so much more than that," Nia had smiled wistfully. "That is how traditions are. I cannot change them." But Blake saw something more in her. She was not just a woman rejected by her tribe. She was intelligent, brave, hardworking. Every passing day, Blake realized his feelings for her were growing. That morning, Blake noticed the sky had a strange color. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, moving quickly toward the ranch. "There's going to be a storm," he announced, observing the sky with concern. And a big one, Nia came out of the house following his gaze. The wind had begun to blow strongly, kicking up dust everywhere. The horses, Nia said immediately. We have to get them to safety. Blake nodded. Let's go quickly. They ran to the corral where the 4 horses were grazing peacefully, unaware of the approaching danger. The sky darkened rapidly as if night were falling in the middle of the day. Blake opened the stable door while Nia tried to calm Thunder, who was starting to get nervous. The wind blew harder and harder, whistling through the ranch buildings. Bring the others, Blake shouted over the noise of the wind. Nia ran toward the other 3 horses, but they were frightened. The first drops of rain began to fall, thick and cold. Within seconds, the rain turned into a deluge. Blake managed to get Thunder into the stable. He ran out to help Nia, who was struggling with one of the horses that refused to move. He is scared, Nia shouted, trying to hold the reins. A deafening thunderclap exploded overhead. The horse neighed in terror and pulled free from Nia's hands, galloping into the open desert. No, Blake shouted, but it was useless. The animal had already disappeared into the curtain of rain. The other 2 horses were also on the verge of panic. Blake and Nia worked together, calming them with soft words as they guided them toward the stable. The wind was so strong they could barely stand. Finally, they got the last 2 horses inside. Blake closed the stable door forcefully just as another thunderclap shook the sky. We have to look for the one that escaped, Nia shouted over the roar of the storm. It is too dangerous, Blake replied, grabbing her arm. We will wait for the storm to pass. He will get lost or worse, Nia insisted. Blake knew she was right, but the storm was fierce. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, followed immediately by deafening thunder. The rain fell so hard it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Nia pulled free from Blake's grip and ran toward the house. Blake followed her, soaked to the bone. Nay, wait, he shouted. But she was already inside looking for something. When Blake entered, he found her taking a long rope and putting on a thick jacket. I'm not going to let him die out there, Nia said with determination. That horse means a lot to you, Blake looked at her intently. She was right. That horse had been a gift from his father before he died. It held enormous sentimental value. Then I am going with you, Blake said, taking another rope. I will not let you go alone, Nia nodded. Together. They went back out into the storm, fighting against the wind and rain. Blake tied one end of the rope to a porch post and gave the other end to Nia. We do not separate, he shouted. If we get lost, we follow the rope back. They began walking toward where they had seen the horse run. Visibility was almost zero. The lightning was their only guide, illuminating the landscape for fractions of a second. There, Nia suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. Blake squinted. In the next flash of lightning, he saw the silhouette of the horse trapped between some large rocks, neighing in terror. They hurried toward it, but the ground was slippery with mud. Nia tripped and fell. Blake helped her up quickly. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, let's go. They reached the horse. The poor animal was terrified, its eyes wide with panic. Blake tried to approach, but the horse backed farther into the rocks. Let me try, Nia said. She approached slowly, speaking to the horse in her Apache language. Her voice was soft and calm despite the chaos of the storm. She extended her hand slowly, letting the animal smell her scent. The horse looked at her distrustfully, but Nia continued talking to it, approaching little by little. Blake watched in amazement as she established a connection with the frightened animal. Finally, the horse allowed Nia to touch its neck. She stroked it gently, continuing her calming words. Gradually, the animal calmed down. Blake approached carefully and tied the rope around the horse's neck. Together, they began to guide it back toward the ranch. The wind roared with more force, pushing them in all directions. A lightning bolt struck dangerously close, illuminating everything with blinding light. The thunder that followed shook the ground. Almost there, Blake shouted, seeing the faint lights of the ranch in the distance. But then something terrible happened. A particularly strong gust of wind hit Nia, making her lose her balance. She slipped in the mud and fell, rolling down a small slope. Nia, Blake screamed in terror. He quickly tied the horse to a sturdy bush and ran toward where she had fallen. The rain pelted his face, blinding him, his heart pounded. Nia, answer me, he shouted desperately. A lightning flash illuminated the area and Blake saw her. She was at the bottom of the slope trying to get up. Blake slid down without caring about the danger. He reached her and helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" Nia coughed, spitting out mud. "I am fine, I think." Blake hugged her tightly, not thinking about what he was doing. The fear of losing her had been overwhelming. "Do not scare me like that again," he murmured against her soaked hair. Nia stood still in his arms for a moment, surprised. Then slowly she returned the embrace. Blake pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. The rain fell on both of them, but at that moment nothing else mattered. "Nah, Blake took a deep breath. The words came out before he could stop them. I love you, marry me." Nia looked at him with wide eyes, completely shocked. "What? I love you," Blake repeated. "Marry me, Nah, I do not want to lose you. I cannot imagine my life without you." Tears mixed with rain on Nia's face. Nia looked at Blake in disbelief. The words she had just heard echoed in her mind like an impossible dream. The rain continued to fall on them, but at that moment everything seemed to have stopped. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. "For real?" "Yes," Blake answered without hesitation, taking her hands in his. "I know only a few weeks have passed, but I know you enough. You are brave, hardworking, kind. You saved me when those men came. You have turned this house into a true home, and he swallowed. I have fallen in love with you, Nah." Nah's tears flowed freely now. All her life she had been told she could never marry, that it was impossible, that she had no value without a family to back her. And now this good, generous man was proposing to her in the middle of a storm. "But my tribe said I could never marry," she whispered. "They said it was impossible." "Your tribe was wrong," Blake said firmly. "You do not need anyone to speak for you. You are valuable on your own, and I do not need to negotiate with anyone. I just need you to say yes." A thunderclap exploded above them, but neither moved. "Blake, you do not know me completely," Nia tried to argue. "Maybe with time you will change your mind." "I'm not going to change my mind," Blake insisted. "I have lived alone for years. I have met many people, but I have never felt what I feel for you. Please, Nia, let us build a life together." Nia closed her eyes, letting his words penetrate her heart. Her whole life she had been rejected, considered a burden, someone without a future. And now she had the chance to have a family again, a real family. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Blake. "Yes," she said with a clear, strong voice. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that lit up Blake's face was brighter than any lightning bolt. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around, both laughing under the torrential rain. "You said yes," Blake shouted joyfully. "You said yes. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes," Nia replied, laughing and crying at the same time. Blake set her down gently and without thinking kissed her. It was a sweet kiss full of promises and hope. When they parted, both were smiling like children. "We should go back," Blake said finally. "We are soaked and it is cold." The horse, Nia remembered. They carefully climbed the slope, helping each other. They found the horse where Blake had tied it calmer now. Together they guided it back to the ranch. When they reached the stable, the storm was beginning to ease. They put the horse inside, dried it with blankets, and made sure it was okay. Then they ran to the house, soaked but happy. Once inside, Blake lit the fireplace while Nia made hot tea. They sat together in front of the fire, wrapped in dry blankets, letting the warmth comfort them. "I cannot believe this is happening," Nia murmured, resting her head on Blake's shoulder. "A month ago I was dying in the desert. Today I'm engaged." "Life can change in an instant," Blake replied, kissing her forehead. "And I am so glad it changed for me when I found you." They stayed like that for hours, talking about the future, making plans, dreaming together. Blake told her about how he wanted to expand the ranch, raise more horses. Nia talked about planting a garden, maybe raising chickens. "When will we get married?" Nia asked eventually. "Whenever you want," Blake replied. "We can go to town next week. There is a judge there who can marry us." Nia nodded, feeling happier than she had been in years. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Blake and Nia traveled to town in the wagon. It was a half-day journey, but worth it. Blake bought a simple but beautiful dress for Nia, and she could not stop looking at herself in the mirror. "I have never had anything so pretty," she confessed with tears in her eyes. The wedding day arrived quickly. It was a small ceremony, just the two of them, the judge and 2 witnesses from town, but it was perfect. When the judge asked, "Do you accept this woman as your wife?" Blake answered with a strong, clear voice, "Yes, I accept." And when he asked Nia, "Do you accept this man as your husband?" She smiled with more happiness than she had ever felt and answered, "Yes, I accept. I declare you husband and wife," the judge announced with a smile. Blake kissed Nia gently as the witnesses applauded. In that moment, Nia knew she had finally found her place in the world. But her story was not over. 2 weeks after the wedding, while Blake and Nia worked on the ranch, they saw dust on the horizon. A group of riders approached. As they drew nearer, Nia recognized the clothing. It was her former Apache tribe. Blake tensed, but Nia placed a calming hand on his arm. "It is okay," she said quietly. "Let me talk to them." The group stopped in front of the ranch. The tribe's chief dismounted, looking at Nia with a serious expression. He had heard rumors that the woman they had expelled was now married to a cowboy. "Nia," the chief said, "we have come to see if the rumors are true." Nia stepped forward, her head held high. Blake stood just behind her, his presence silent but firm. "Are the rumors true?" Nia replied with a clear voice. "I am married. This is my husband, Blake." The chief looked at Blake, evaluating him. "You told me I could not marry," Nia continued, her voice gaining strength. "You said I had no family, that it was impossible. You expelled me and left me to die in the desert." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I did not die. Blake found me, saved me, cared for me, and asked me to marry him, not because I had a family to negotiate for me, but because he valued me for who I am." The chief lowered his gaze, clearly ashamed. "Now I have a family again," Nia said, taking Blake's hand. "A real family that chose me and that I chose. So you can return to your tribe and tell them that Nia, the woman they called impossible to marry, is now a happily married woman." Blake squeezed her hand with pride. The Apache warriors looked at each other uncomfortable. The chief finally spoke. "We were wrong about you. We made a mistake." "Yes, you did," she replied simply. "But it does not matter anymore. I have my own life now." The chief nodded slowly, mounting his horse again. "We wish you good fortune," he said before turning away. The tribe rode off, leaving a cloud of dust. Nia watched them disappear over the horizon, feeling she had finally closed that chapter of her life. "You were incredible," Blake said, hugging her from behind. "I was telling the truth," Nia replied, turning to look at him. "You are my family now. You and this ranch, this is my home," Blake kissed her softly. "And it always will be." That night, sitting on the porch under a sky full of stars, Blake and Nia talked about the future. "Do you think we will have children someday?" Nia asked shyly. "I would love that," Blake replied, smiling. "This ranch needs children's laughter." Nia smiled, imagining a future full of love and family. And for the first time in her life, she knew with certainty that she belonged somewhere.